Okay, so this discussion is about the Articles of Confederation, America's first system of government. Yes, we did have a system of government before our current Constitution. We're going to talk a little bit today about how that system developed, some of the characteristics of it, and then some of its successes and some of its failures. So we have to remember that during the American Revolution, there were really 13 independent states that had declared independence from Great Britain. And through much of the Revolutionary War, as we learn, those 13 states were often fighting what amounted to 13 independent wars during the Revolution. We know that Continental Congress had some difficulty raising money and creating a standing army because of this. And so it really was kind of a miracle that Washington was able to put together an army and hold it together for so long and actually win the Revolutionary War. When the states declared independence, many of them wrote their own constitutions during the Revolutionary War as well. Massachusetts and Pennsylvania are well known for this. Massachusetts' constitution looks very much like our current constitution with 3 branches of government: a governor, a legislature, and a Supreme Court. Pennsylvania's constitution was a little bit different. They had a council of governors, and they talked a lot about equality and property redistribution. But the bottom line is that the states were starting to govern themselves and create their own constitutions and governments throughout the Revolutionary War, and this is one reason why it really was like 13 states fighting 13 different wars at times. Despite this, though, the states did recognize that they needed to cooperate for certain things since they were near each other. And one of those things was cooperation to beat Great Britain, and another was defense from Native Americans along the frontier. And finally, the third piece was to cooperate for trade purposes. So the states did create a loose alliance, or a confederation, during the Revolutionary War, and they wrote a constitution called the Articles of Confederation. And this system created the first system of government for the United States. The term loose alliance, as I have here in the PowerPoint, describes really what the purpose of the Articles of Confederation was supposed to be. It was supposed to allow the states to maintain their independence, if you will, and the right to govern their citizens, but still cooperate in some ways as a larger group of states for certain topics. So the purpose of the Articles of Confederation really is, say here, it favored local control and state governments. The states were really reluctant to give control to a national government, and that makes a lot of sense if we understand the causes behind the American Revolution. We know that many of the citizens of the states were concerned that a parliament and a king in England were making decisions that affected them locally, primarily on taxes and things of that nature. So states were reluctant to give control to another national government for fear that people in a central capital city like Philadelphia perhaps would be making laws that would affect people in Boston or Savannah and other places within the states. They wanted the state governments elected locally, their local leaders, to make decisions that affected their lives. And the Articles of Confederation gave them this structure to do that. It really made the state governments more powerful than the national government and the National Congress that was created. The Articles created a National Congress. It did have a president of the Congress, though his powers were limited compared to what we would think about the president now. And within that Congress, each state was represented by 1 vote. So each state got 1 vote when it came to matters and laws and decisions that the National Congress was going to discuss, or laws they were going to create. The Articles were limited in the powers that they gave National Congress. As I said before, that makes sense because they wanted local control. So they limited what National Congress could do. They gave them the power to make treaties, declare and conduct war, settle land disputes, and tax imported goods. Pretty much what you would need to do to fight a war against Great Britain. And the Articles of Confederation did work well during the war. It did allow the colonies to conduct the war and actually eventually win the war. It was Confederation Congress that signed the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War. So it did create some success in that way, but afterwards, the structure of the Articles of Confederation did make it a little bit difficult for the states to govern themselves. And we're going to take a look at a couple of problems here that the states were facing under the Articles of Confederation and Confederation Congress, how those problems arose, and then what the states tried to do to fix it. Some of those problems will include things like what the Articles did not allow Congress to do. It did not allow Congress to directly tax citizens or states. Congress had to ask the states to collect taxes for them and then voluntarily give that tax money to Congress. Congress was not allowed to place an income tax, which many of you are familiar with today. So Congress really had a problem raising money. And again, we saw that during the Revolutionary War. There really wasn't a method for Congress to enforce its laws either. The president, again, there was a president, but his powers were limited, and the states had to voluntarily agree to follow the laws of Confederation Congress. So there wasn't some of the mechanisms or some of the powers that Congress has today that allows them to enforce laws. The Articles of Confederation also did not prevent the states from printing their own money, and so many states had their own currency, and that created some problems in trade, as we'll see. And as we said before, the Articles did not require the states to pay taxes to Congress. Congress had to ask politely. So some of the problems that were created here that the states were facing that Congress had to deal with, again, there's 5 of them we're going to look at. And the first problem was debt. The states were in serious debt from the Revolutionary War. And that debt was in 2 forms. There was debt to soldiers who hadn't been paid yet. And during the Revolutionary War, Washington and the generals kept saying, sign up, you get a signing bonus, you get paid $13 a month, etc. And even after the war was over, there were some soldiers that hadn't been paid for months or years of service, and Congress needed to do that, otherwise those people were going to get upset and could lead to a situation where people distrusted the government. The states were also in serious debt to France. France invested about $2 million in the American Revolution to kind of get back at their rival Great Britain. And France was demanding that money back because they were having their own financial problems as well and on the verge of their own revolution. So there was a lot of pressure from France for the United States to pay that money back to them. And as we said before, Congress had trouble collecting taxes to pay that debt. They had to ask the states. If Congress passed a tax on imported clothes from Great Britain, it was the states that collected those taxes and then had to voluntarily give that money over to Congress. And not every state was willing to do that. Sometimes they kept the money for themselves, or sometimes they disagreed with the tax and they simply ignored it. The second problem that was facing Congress immediately after the war was that the states had won a whole bunch of new land from Great Britain. Great Britain ceded or gave land from the Mississippi River all the way to the East Coast and up to the Great Lakes. So all of this territory here was now the United States of America, where it had previously been limited to the East Coast and the Appalachian Mountains here. So immediately when the war was over, the states started making land claims west of the Appalachian Mountains. And if you notice here, Virginia makes a huge land claim here, all the way up into the Great Lakes, pretty much all this western territory here. Connecticut claimed that they had a right to land here on the Great Lakes. And of course, North Carolina and Georgia go all the way to the borders. Now, there were a variety of reasons why they're making these land claims, and particularly they wanted access to the Great Lakes for trade and shipping and fishing and economic reasons. And there also, the idea that the bigger a state was, the more powerful it was within the government. So this was created a serious problem where states were disputing about these lands and if they had the right to it. And in a lot of cases, it almost led to internal civil wars where where other states were complaining that they didn't have a right to those lands. So In this case, Congress did come up with a solution to deal with these problems, not totally solving them, but at least making it manageable for them. The first one was the issue of money, and with the land ordinances of 1785 and 1787, they did address these two problems. So 1785 land ordinance addressed the problem of money and it allowed Congress to sell off public land. And this was one of the biggest sources of income for Confederation Congress, was land from land sales. And what it did is it divided up the Northwest Territory, which are these states here: Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, current states today. They weren't states at the time. But divided up that territory into these little townships. And you can see these townships then were divided into acreages. And the government would sell off either whole townships or 1 acre sections to people to create a farm or a house or a business. And that created a lot of income for Confederation Congress. The second land ordinance of 1787 created the states of the Northwest Territories and these boundaries that we know exist today. It also created a system for new territories to become states. Ohio was the first one to come in 1803 under that new system. And it banned slavery in the Northwest Territory. It addressed the issue of these land claims, and Congress was able to get Virginia and Massachusetts and Connecticut to give up their claim to these lands and give it to the United States in order to form new states. So Congress was successful in solving those two problems. Problem number 4 is the power to govern, and we see this number 9 of 13 there. In order for Congress to make decisions and to pass laws like the land ordinances of 1785 and 87, it took 9 of the 13 states to agree on it. That's a supermajority. You know from being a high school student, it's very difficult to get 9 out of 13 people to agree on something, like going to the movies or something like that. And now we're talking about states making decisions that are going to affect their power and their income. So with this situation, the states had a very, very difficult time passing laws and making laws. To take it one step further, it required 13 out of 13 states to amend the Articles of Confederation. So when they realized that something wasn't working, like perhaps the ability to collect taxes, they couldn't amend that because all the states had to agree, and not every state was willing to go along with it. The fifth problem was Shays' Rebellion and disruptions from the citizens in general. In this case, farmers in Massachusetts were concerned about taxes that Massachusetts was collecting to repay their war debt from the Revolutionary War. When farmers couldn't pay those taxes, they rebelled and shut down the court system. This created fear and uncertainty that the new nation might fall apart and that similar situations might occur, and that the states were having very severe economic problems following the Revolution, and that they weren't able to deal with it themselves. Some states met in Annapolis in September of 1786 to talk about some of these economic issues, primarily trade issues with states importing and exporting goods. A lot of states were putting taxes on each other when shipping goods from state to state, and also the fact that many of them had different currencies and they didn't know how to exchange them. So initially only 5 delegates met in Annapolis. There were delegates from Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut that were supposed to go to this meeting, but they didn't make it on time. But they were talking about all these trade issues and how to make the Articles of Confederation better. Ultimately, they agreed that they would meet in Philadelphia the next year, and they hoped that all of the states would agree to attend. Because remember, it would take all the states to agree on any changes that would help make these economic problems go away. In 1787, 12 out of the 13 delegates did meet in Philadelphia, all attended but Rhode Island. They were supposed to revise the Articles of Confederation here, but after some discussion it became clear that they needed a brand new system of government that gave the national government much stronger powers to deal with some of the problems we just saw. Problems with the debt, problems collecting taxes, and problems with trade that existed between the states. And it was here at the Philadelphia Convention that they eventually wrote our current Constitution and got rid of our first system of government, the Articles of Confederation. However, that first system, was very, very important in the early development of our political history.